Hey, hi guys, I'm Sahej. So, um, I'm going to talk about a little bit about my practice, how it comes about, and we'll also see some films. Um, so I'm a sculptor, but that's kind of a limited way of describing what I do. What I actually really kind of make is stories, or at least like things that you can, like the viewer, and like I mean, I see myself as a viewer as well. Um, can make stories out of, right? So essentially, what you have, like even with the image behind me, are these characters, and then there are these objects and artifacts, and that look like they might belong to this alternate civilization, or might belong to some era in the past, or 5,000 years into the future, all collapsing into our timeline and kind of erupting into our everyday. So this began like in art school. Like when I graduated, I started doing these performances that were sort of like these kind of rituals of movement um, throughout. Well, they began at the Bandra Skywalk in Bombay, which is what you see behind me. Um, there's this shrouded kind of costume that I made of this shaman-like being. Um, okay. So yeah, like you had this, all of the sort of fabric used on the costume was actually stuff that I found. Like I mean, the not a very nice image, but like basically it was like kind of these swatches that I found in a curtain book and a piece of like polyester fur, and I decided to stitch it together and make this costume out of. Which is essentially how I work even now. Like I work with things that I find and try to look for what are the possibilities of kind of looking for histories within those objects. Um, so this was like the first in a series of kind of performances where I dress up and kind of move through, like usually through spaces of commute. So like the skywalk here, and then through the, well, this goes into the Dhobi Talao subway. What? Okay. So like now the second performance that happened. Yeah. So this was in the Dhobi Talao subway in Bombay, and the subway itself has these like really kind of weird acoustics. So what I decided to do was create this didgeridoo, which is like an instrument that's played by Aborigines from Australia, and there's a similar kind of instrument that's played by Buddhist monks. Um, Now, the one that I made though was out of PVC pipes and this branch that, I mean, well, you can't see it, but anyway. Um, and then I was playing it in this hexagonal subway. And what happened was like, because of the acoustics of the subway, if you make a loud enough sound, the entire space kind of, reverberates with the noise of the didgeridoo. And it became a way of like almost extending that instrument into the space. Um, now, Now that was the kind of gesture of the performance, but then what happened was like people who were viewing it sort of started saying, "Oh, are there two of them?" Which is kind of fun. Like it's this spectral character who's just extended through noise in a way. Um, Now, I mean, going forward, like I kind of decided to make more characters where I got my friends to dress up as well and kind of almost create this fictional kind of anthropology of these characters that are sort of entering into our world. And then so you have these kind of almost ethnographic kind of portraits that you take of that you would find in museums um, or what have you. Like I mean, where um, these figures are kind of like uh, they're being looked at and they're sort of being documented and in order to be understood or like kind of classified in a way. But they can't be because essentially they're all kind of like they're put together through this kind of collage or rather that ultimately is this absurd thing. Now a little more on collage or what's not collage. I mean, like, so this the kind of way in which I work is there's this term for it called bricolage, which kind of approximates jugaad in a way, like where you kind of begin with a few set of things, and then that just kind of spirals and snowballs into larger structures. So I began creating these characters, and then that kind of like began to sort of evolve and like kind of snowball into this larger kind of evolving narrative, meta narrative of this civilization. And then I started making, yeah, that's, I'm also a Star Wars nerd, so like, you know, that there's always going to be like a bit of a wink to that. Yeah, so like, I mean, I started making objects that could have been like, you know, animals or like insects or beings that could belong in that, in this civilization. Except that everything that goes into these sculptures is like coat hangers and yeah, branches, bits of furniture, um, yeah, whatever I could like literally get my hand on. And so there's a lot of dumpster diving involved in my practice. Like that's where I get all my kind of art materials from. Yeah, furniture. Yeah. So that's actually the one that I put together 2 days back. Um, at the Bhavdaji Art Museum in Bombay, which just finished its 150 years since it was made. Interestingly, the museum itself began in 1857. It was conceptualized in 1855, and then following the the first mutiny, the first war of independence, this museum was put together. It's a really kind of fascinating museum because through its lifetime, it's I mean the objects in the museum have kind of seen the mutiny. They've seen, and I mean they've held through these, you know, the mutiny, the Bombay plague, the partition, independence, and its aftermath, and these objects are sort of set out to kind of kind of see even more. Like, I mean, as we kind of live through these really trying times. The object, I mean, the structure that I put together was actually made using objects from the museum. So there's this like kind of storage of space. Okay, so interestingly, the museum it's a colonial era museum, and it's made in next to a zoo and a botanical garden. So the way it was looked at, I mean, the way it functioned was like, you know, you'd see animals in one place, you'd see kind of plants of this colony in one space, and in the museum you would see the people and their rituals and things like that. And it was set up by the East India Company, and then ever since like the museum was kind of refurbished, it's kind of taken on this uh, let's call it post-colonial kind of gaze, where it's I mean, attempting to reevaluate its own its kind of troubled past. So it invites artists to kind of respond to its history and things like that. So what I did was like kind of very kind of almost directly, physically kind of bring objects that were sort of thrown away and put into storage in the museum. Now the storage of the museum is in the zoo, right? And it's in this like kind of holding area where they would keep nocturnal animals. So you have like, I mean, bits of like wood and like broken pieces of artwork that were once shown in the museum in this space where at once, you know, nocturnal animals were kept. Anyway, so the bones for like whatever that creature is were in this weird space, and then they kind of take this form. Um, right. Now, I'm going to be showing you work from a kind of, again, sort of uh, running series of works that I've been making. This began in Kochi in Kerala in 2014, where I was invited to be part of the Kochi-Muziris Biennial. Now, it's called the Kochi-Muziris Biennial, and Muziris is this ancient port city. It's almost like India's first, or the landmass that is now known as India, the first kind of port to this place. And Pliny the Elder kind of makes a note of it as well and says that there were pirates in this area. Now, interestingly, now Muziris is all but lost, and there are these like kind of 7 or 8 alleged sites where it might be existing. And there's this kind of strange history writing project that's happening in this place where the ASI is finding objects that are old, like fragments of terracotta, which is essentially what the first thing that you would find in any dig site. You'd find bits of broken pots, and then toys, and then as you go further in, you'd find even bits of metal. So now what's happening is like in these dig sites, there's this kind of uh, you know narrative building kind of structure. Narrative building exercise that's going on where people are finding bits and pieces of like carved out terracotta and somehow like saying that they belong from the Vedic age. Muziris predates the Vedas as well. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on over there. Anyway, now, so for my project at the Kochi-Muziris Biennial, I was there for about 8 months and I created about 850 sculptures. Some of them really small, tiny, that can fit in the palm of your hand. Some of them were very larger. And you'd find them in this kind of disused laboratory space. So when you kind of encounter them, you see them as these specimens that were being studied or examined from this. Yeah, some of them were kind of large. Uh, so they looked like they were being studied and then abandoned in this laboratory that was kind of like kind of just got left behind. Um, yeah, so it was kind of like 16 little cubicles of a lot of clay. and and the objects themselves kind of look like these robots with these like twiddling kind of appendages. Some of them look like bits of toys or things you'd find in like sci-fi films or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And some of them just look like agricultural tools. So you have like a really kind of like rich civilization that got left behind. And the idea was like, I mean, if we are kind of rewriting or like making sense of history in this place, then what happens when you kind of put, um, absurd things like an inverted pyramid in it? Like, anyway, so with that, like, and anyway, so that project kind of extended into another exhibition that had like another sort of project that I did at the Liverpool Biennial in 2016, which was on similar grounds. Also, interestingly, that's when like so the work behind me was like installed on the day on I think June 26th when the Brexit vote happened. And the sculpture behind it is actually again a colonial era sculpture that says every man must do his duty under the crown, and has these like slaves on it. Um, and you could feel the tension in the air when we were installing it. And anyway, um, so more broken things and repurposed objects pretending to be things they're not, things from alternate civilizations. All right. So now maybe we can see a few videos. Um, so yeah, can we kill the lights as well? Okay, so that's it. Um, so I think I'm kind of going over time, so like we won't watch the second one, but like you can find it online. Um, anyway, so I brought one of the sculptures with me. This is like what I make essentially, and so I find things, like I said, and then oh wait, maybe should I talk about the first one a little bit? Like what you saw was actually it was an animated idol that I found again in well under the Andheri flyover. Yeah, and it's about yay big. I dragged it to the studio, and it's hollow. So now what happens is like during Visarjan, these things are kind of like put it at the beach or like wherever once they've been prayed to. So I kind of brought this thing into the studio, and it's kind of like sinking into itself, so it's hollow. So I crawled inside it, and then I animated it like from the inside. So it looks like this idol that's sort of trying to come to life. Or whatever. Anyway, so that's what the video is, and I mean you can make what you want of it and everything, which is the other side of the fun. Anyway, so now with or to just kind of bring our show and tell to an end, this is like a sculpture I made in 2012 or 13, and it's put together using pieces of wood, PVC pipes, polyurethane foam, polyester fur, plastic, pretending to be this old thing or some kind of weird hammer that might come from, I don't know, Star Wars. And I'll play it for you. So it goes like this. Right. Thank you.